This is Special Chronicles, giving respect and a voice to people with special needs.
I shudder thinking how the world can be so cruel. Lend my voice to those who can't. It's time we try, it's time we care, it's time we stand. It starts with a voice.
Welcome to the Special Chronicles Podcast. My name is Daniel Smrokowski. I'm the founder and host of Special Chronicles, our website, specialchronicles.com. To follow Special Chronicles on socials and wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe to our newsletter, and find the show notes for this episode on specialchronicles.com. This week on the Special Chronicles Podcast, our returning guest is author Melissa Hart to talk about World Down Syndrome Day on March 21st, and a forthcoming book, Down Syndrome Out Loud, 20 plus stories about disability and determination. And so for those of you listening to just the, if you're listening or watching this live, it is March 21st, Friday. But if you're listening to this on demand after the fact, then this episode is going live on March 21st because it is World Down Syndrome Day. So if we put your virtual hands together as we welcome Melissa back on Special Chronicles. Welcome back, Melissa.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm thrilled to be here, and I love that studio audience.
Oh, yes. There's where you are and where I am. There's nobody. I just have some pictures here and in my studio. So these pictures in my studio over here. It's like I've got an audience here. But yeah,
fantastic. Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and so a long time. Well, I think I'm trying to think back when the last time you were on. It might have been 2 or 3 years ago, mm-hmm. I believe. And so I was excited when you reached out about your new book that you have, and we'll in the show notes for this episode, wherever you all are listening or watching this episode, if you're watching on our YouTube channel, if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, on specialchronicles.com, I'll put links to where our listeners can pre-order this new book. But I'm sure we have a lot of new listeners. Yeah. So why don't you introduce yourself? I guess we introduce yourself to any of our new listeners and your connection to our disability community.
Oh, thanks so much. So I'm Melissa Hart. I am an Oregon-based journalist with work in the New York Times and Smithsonian and CNN and the Los Angeles Times and numerous other publications. I grew up with a brother who has Down syndrome, and I've written about people with this genetic condition for the Washington Post and Muse magazine, and a wonderful dog magazine called The Wildest. Shout out to Allison Fogarty of Doggy Delights. I'm also the author of several books, both fiction and nonfiction, and my newest book comes out on June 3rd, and it's called Down Syndrome Out Loud, 20 plus stories about disability and determination.
Awesome. Yeah, it was exciting to talk to you a couple years ago about that fiction novel that you wrote. But now with this new book, that it's real. It's real stories that you are telling, and so for your upcoming book, Down Syndrome Out Loud, where you highlight, as you said, 20 stories about disability and determination. What inspired you to compile these stories, and why was now 2025 the right time for this book to come out?
Right. So when my brother and I were kids in the 1980s, we searched in vain for books that represented his experience as a person with Down syndrome. And Daniel, we found nothing. There was nothing out there. So about 3 years ago, I think it was during the pandemic, I wrote for the Washington Post reporting on Chris Nikich, who's the first Ironman triathlete with Down syndrome. And in that same article, I profiled Abigail, the advocate Adams, and Nate Simon of 21 Pineapples. And I was so impressed with the three of them and how they seem to have about 6 times my energy and determination that I started poking around and researching other people with Down syndrome and what they were doing in the world. And what I found really inspired me to get up off my butt and find them and contact them. So, and, with the goal of writing this book. So really, it's always been the right time for this book. I mean, it was the right time hundreds of years ago, frankly.
Yes.
But right now, there are so many issues on the table which directly affect people with Down syndrome. Everything from the cuts to the education department to threats to Medicaid. This book, with its 25 profiles of people with Down syndrome living their best lives, will help to create compassion and understanding. And I'm hoping it helps to protect the basic civil rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'm so glad this book is finally getting published and that I get to be the one to write it. What a privilege.
Awesome. Yeah, it's exciting to hear that, and I'm sure, which we'll get to in a little bit, but I'm sure a lot of families with young children with Down syndrome will have a resource where they can look to this book, and then their children will be able to have role models that they can look up to, that this is what I can achieve. Did that also kind of play into why you wanted to compile these stories?
Yes. I personally need role models in my life. I can't be the only one, right?
Yeah.
I just feel like representation of all people is so important in books. And I've got to tell you that there are still so few novels and so few nonfiction books about and by people with Down syndrome, people like my brother. And that's just not okay. So you're talking about, the people who have children with Down syndrome and what we've created. This book is not just my book. This is a product of a team. The illustrator Maria Pereira, who's from Mexico, Daniel, she knocked it out of the park. I don't know if you can see these gorgeous illustrations. There's John Tucker from Born This Way. I mean, who's this? This is Ronnie Brown, the fry guy from Texas. She has just made this incredible product with me and with the 25 people who were generous enough to share their real life stories about their challenges and successes. And they are role models of every type. It's just incredible.
Awesome, awesome. Can you share a little bit about the process that you went through to collect these personal stories? What was it like for you to interview and connect with so many individuals with Down syndrome and the families? Because I'm sure that they all had incredible stories, but what was that process like to talk with these individuals as well as their families?
I'm a journalist and I love research. I had so much fun. I must have spent months just reading stories and watching YouTube clips and going on to Instagram and TikTok. Nobody uses Facebook anymore.
Yeah.
And looking at videos and reading books and watching the Peanut Butter Falcon and just really immersing myself in the lives of as many people around the world as possible, in an effort to whittle down, hundreds and thousands of people into 25. My editor and I, and Maria, the illustrator, wanted to represent the most diverse group of people possible. So the book includes fashion designer Isabella Tejada from Guatemala and Tommy Jessup from the UK, and Madison Tevlin and Meg Osada from Canada, as well as people from many different ethnicities and backgrounds in the US. Also, some of the people I chose to profile they just talk all the time. I'm thinking of Nick Big Dog Doyle from the Improvineers stand-up comedy troupe in Ohio. And then other people that I interviewed were people of very few words, and they preferred to express themselves through arts or dance or ice skating or things like that. And so one of the Zoom interviews I did struck me as particularly remarkable. Meg Osada from Canada is one of those people who is just not fond of talking all that much. Instead, she's a painter, an ice dancer, a rhythmic gymnast. And so she was able on Zoom to take her laptop all over her house so that I could see her art. I could see portraits of her dressed up in traditional Japanese outfits. I could also see her favorite Starbucks drink. And then she shared with me clips of her ice dancing and her gymnastics. And I think she had an art gallery opening as well. So I was able to get this really nuanced profile of her thanks to the magic of, video interviewing. I also got to do a lot of YouTube research. I got to watch stand-up comedy by Nick Doyle of the Improvineers. I got to watch that incredible documentary with Kayla McKeon, who's the first person with Down syndrome to work as a U.S. congressional lobbyist. I got to watch John Tucker's incredible video from Born This Way called Shake Your Booty. You can watch it too.
Awesome. So, what is the in all of these stories? What's the key message or the takeaway that you hope readers will gain from reading the stories? I'm sure that there's a lot of I'm sure each story probably has their own key message, but all 20 stories, what's the key message that you would like readers to take away from these stories?
That is a great question. The key message in every single one of these 20 plus stories is the importance of people broadening their friendship circles to include people with Down syndrome and other intellectual and or developmental and physical disabilities. Too often, these people have been hidden away in special schools or forbidden from playing on little league teams or going to universities. This strikes me as barbaric. I'm hoping this book, with its profiles of people who generously shared their stories, their successes, and their challenges will give readers the insight and inspiration to reach out a hand in friendship at their workplaces, at their schools, at their social clubs, in the grocery store. Daniel, one time, I think this was about 15 years ago, my brother had come to visit. And I think you and I talked about this last time I was on your podcast. He was away from me and he in a different aisle of the grocery store. And he said hi to a little girl who was maybe 5 and gave his classic gorgeous smile. He's very handsome. And she smiled back and she said hi. And Daniel, her mother grabbed her by the hand and yanked her away and said, "Don't talk to people like that." That needs to never happen again. And if there was one pivotal moment that made me realize I needed to write this book with the help of so many people in the community, it was that moment.
Awesome. I'm sure many people will see the value that these individuals have and that they bring to the communities, and hopefully will invite their co-workers, invite their neighbors and friends and family to meet each of the individuals with Down syndrome who are featured in the book. Hopefully, the readers will be able to introduce them to their community. So the title suggests that the voices of the people with Down syndrome will be front and central as they are. How did you ensure that these individuals' voices are authentically represented in the book?
This was incredibly important to me to center these voices, and I spent hours researching and interviewing the people in this book. After all of this research, I carefully crafted lists of questions specific to each person and used as many direct quotes and paraphrases from my interview subjects as possible. As well, I gave authentic details from even my video interviews on Zoom. So I was able to share with people like what was on somebody's bedroom walls. We all decorate our bedroom walls. I was able to share what was on different people's walls. Or in the case of Ronnie, the fry guy, what his French fry booth looks like, both when he packs it all up and drives with his sister to different fairs and festivals, and when it's all set up. I was able to incorporate quotes from CJ Casagrande, the animated character with Down syndrome, voiced by Jared Kozak on Nickelodeon's The Loud House. Every person in the book got to review what I wrote as many times as they wanted, and I would not submit their profile to my editor until every single person was happy with the way that they had portrayed themselves and the way they were coming across in these profiles. As well, the illustrator of the book, Maria, worked with each person extensively to make sure they were 100% happy with the illustrations that she did. I actually worked with Maria too. I didn't know I was going to get an illustration, and I had to tell her, Maria, you made me look like I'm 20 in this picture, and I'm considerably older than that. So perhaps could you add some wrinkles?
Awesome. We're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about some of the themes in the book with Melissa Hart, author of Down Syndrome Out Loud. We'll be right back to let you all know that support for Special Chronicles comes from listeners like you. Please join our supporters with a monthly or one-time donation so we can operate our studio, continue our mission, giving respect and voice to people with disabilities. Visit specialchronicles.com/give. specialchronicles.com/give. And if you want to access our bonus content, like when we were trying to get rid of an echo before we started recording, if you want to catch some of that behind the scenes, you can join now at specialchronicles.com/plus to access that premium bonus content. I believe $10 a month or any donation. I forgot what the exact amounts are, but if you can join now at specialchronicles.com/plus to see how you can access that bonus content. And we're back. And as we now get into some of the themes of the book, your book emphasizes both disability and determination, which determination is what so many of us in the disability community are determined to achieve our dreams, to have a job, to go to school, to be in the community. So, how do you define determination, and why is it such an essential theme in the stories that you've featured?
Well, anybody who pursues a goal like arts or athletics or activism or being an entrepreneur has got to have determination. And for me, that means working toward a particular goal with focus and passion. As a person who has a lot of determination myself, I've always been interested in meeting and writing about people who overcome challenges and pursue their dreams. As I told you before, I need role models in my life. And these people in Down Syndrome Out Loud are role models who remind me, and I'll bet they'll remind everybody else, how to set a goal and work toward that goal despite setbacks and criticism. Honestly, these people rock.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. And I'm sure these stories will help to debunk and to really get rid of a lot of misconceptions that the mainstream community have towards people with Down syndrome. So throughout the book, what do you think are the most common misconceptions about people that people have about Down syndrome, and how does this book help to really challenge or to debunk these misconceptions?
Yeah, this makes me want to cry. Daniel, the most heartbreaking misconception for me as the sister of a man with Down syndrome and as a teacher for the last several decades is the misconception that people with Down syndrome cannot learn in mainstream K through 12 classrooms and colleges and universities. That is just wrong. I hate this idea that students and their families still have to fight for their rights, for the same education that's automatically conferred upon them, conferred upon their non-disabled peers. This is an absolutely ignorant attitude, and there is no reason for it in the age of easily accessible information on the internet. My gosh, Pablo Pineda in Spain earned his teaching certificate from a university years ago. And Rachel Handlin just earned her MFA, Master of Fine Arts, in photography from Pratt Institute just last year. Her master's degree. How dare we look at a person who looks a little bit different or speaks a little bit different from mainstream students and relegate them to a so-called special classroom. That is absolutely barbaric. I feel pretty strongly about this. Thank you for letting me speak about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm from that's it's a difficult thing to talk about, but it's something that we should cover all aspects that the community should understand, and just like in any community, the diversity is like within any group in society or any community. Diversity is in all groups. So how does the book help to address the diversity within the Down syndrome community, not only in terms of abilities but also life experiences?
Yeah. So I spoke a little bit about this before. But again, I've profiled people from around the world, including a ballet dancer, Christine Lau in China, and Isabel in Guatemala, and an actor in Britain, Tommy Jessup, and a dancer in Canada. I think Karen Gaffney, who's in her late 40s, might be the oldest person I profiled for this book. And Alex Lee is still in high school, so he's a mathematical whiz. He might be the youngest person. So there's a diversity of age in Down syndrome out loud. There's a diversity of ethnicity, of communication styles. There are people who spent their K through 12 education in special education classes, as well as people who were in mainstream K through 12 classes their whole lives and went to college or university. There are people who are adults still living with their parents. There are people who live with roommates who are their good friends. There are people who live alone. And I wanted to give readers a vivid sense of as many different types of people with Down syndrome as I possibly could.
Awesome. And I'm sure that so the book now is available to pre-order, but I'm sure once more readers will get the book in their hands, I'm sure it's going to make a really positive impact on society and across the country and across the globe. So what do you hope that the book's impact will be on society's understanding of Down syndrome and even disability as a whole? I saw that there was a for World Down Syndrome Day, there was a video I saw on Instagram that I believe it's in an Italian Down syndrome organization that I know Madison Tevlin was featured in the video last year, but the video that they have for this year featured not only a person with Down syndrome, but it featured a few different types of disabilities. So, World Down Syndrome Day is just focused on Down syndrome. This video, if I remember, I'll try to share it on our Special Chronicles pages again, because it highlighted a lot of different disabilities. So, kind of building upon that video, as well as connected with your book, how do you hope that the book's impact will be on society's understanding of Down syndrome and disability as a whole?
You know, I just saw that newest video that you're talking about. My 18-year-old daughter forwarded it to me, actually. I thought that was remarkable. And oh my goodness, please put Madison Tevlin's video in your show notes if you can. Yeah. That was an incredible piece of work. Oh my goodness. So I've been writing a piece this week, which I hope will appear in a major newspaper, about what the education cuts will mean to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I've been researching Willowbrook Institute in New York and how journalist Geraldo Rivera did an expose on this horrific institution in the early 1970s. So 2 years after his story broke and the public could see truly shameful images of the way that people with Down syndrome and cerebral palsy were being treated in this institution. 2 years after this expose, my brother was born, and the pediatrician told my parents, he's never going to be able to walk or talk. You should put him in an institution. My mother, thank goodness, said, over my dead body. I was surprised when I was interviewing people for this book, and sometimes their parents would come on the Zoom as well. I was surprised that even 20 years ago, pediatricians were still suggesting that parents institutionalize their kids with Down syndrome. So thank goodness their parents said no to this as well. I'm hoping that the people in the book pull public perception of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities out of the dark ages forever, with real life role models of what happens when we respect all people enough to give them basic rights and individualized support and the power to follow their dreams. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's about it. We're going to take another short break, and when we come back, we'll get into some personal insights from this book with Melissa Hart, author of Down Syndrome Out Loud. To let you know, support for Special Chronicles comes from the ComEd Energy Force Ambassador Program, the country's first energy and solar efficiency education program designed for and taught by people with disabilities. Learn more at specialchronicles.com/ComEd. And support for Special Chronicles comes from United Airlines, Bridge Disability Business Resource Group, connecting people of all abilities. Learn more on United's commitment to disability inclusion for employment and travel at specialchronicles.com/United, specialchronicles.com/United. And we're back with Melissa Hart, author of Down Syndrome Out Loud. And as a writer, what is this project? Because I'm sure it, as you said, it took many months to do these Zoom interviews and to talk with all the individuals with Down syndrome and the families that are featured in the book. As a writer, what has this project taught you about the power of storytelling and changing attitude toward disability?
I love that question. I think because I have written for so many years about people from marginalized demographics, I realized a long time ago that storytelling has the power to help us to fall in love with people and make us feel with them and for them and to create empathy. Storytelling gives us insight into people's needs and desires. There have actually been incredible studies showing that people who just read a couple of paragraphs of fiction or nonfiction featuring a protagonist from a marginalized demographic, just instantly, when they're tested, they show increased empathy for that particular entire marginalized demographic based on the story of just one person. And I feel like that empathy that we get from storytelling is key to getting politicians and other powerful individuals to recognize people with Down syndrome and other disabilities as valued members of our community with so much to offer.
Awesome. As you were talking, I did find that video of Madison Tuvlin from last year. So I will be. So for those of you that have not watched it, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. So wherever you're listening to this podcast,
Here's
go.
Madison.
Awesome. Madison on the podcast a couple of times. One time with her sister, and then I had her on a couple years ago to talk about the Champions movie.
She's so funny.
Yeah. She was really fun to talk to, and really talented. I mean, she's a single. She's an actress. She does interviews. Very talented.
And a model. She's a model as well.
Model. Awesome. Yeah. So many. And so was there Madison's story is one, but was there any particular stories or experiences that deeply resonated with you, either because of their emotional depth or of their unique perspectives?
Two stories come to mind. I think it was Zach Gottsagen, the Peanut Butter Falcon, and his mom, who told me about how I believe he wanted to play baseball on his little league team, and they told him no. And I hope I'm not misquoting his mom, but I'm pretty sure they had to sue the city so that Zach could play baseball with his friends. And that struck me as absolutely heartbreaking. Why on earth would an adult or a group of adults think it's okay to exclude a kid from a sports team for kids because they look a little different or sound a little different from the other players? That's just, why would you do that? That's ridiculous. Yeah. On a more positive note, Karen Gaffney's story about becoming a professional long-distance swimmer really got to me, because I'm a long-distance runner and bicyclist, but I am awful at swimming. So I loved getting to spend time with her and learning all about her training regimen, which started when she was just a kid. And really, Daniel, it involves waking up very early and swimming laps, so many laps. And so learning about her very disciplined approach to swimming made me much more disciplined in my approach to running and cycling, and especially strength training, so that I'm a better athlete. Oh my gosh, Karen is so inspiring.
Awesome. I'm sure. So many that, and so many stories are inspiring, and I'm sure that the inspiration word might sometimes be overly used within our community, even like speaking about inspiration porn and sometimes, but when you talked about how inspiring these stories are, it's more of a positive inspiration. I think that can you kind of maybe touch on that? Will if people kind of like not use that kind of inspiration porn towards these stories, but inspired in more of a positive light?
Yeah, totally. So the term inspiration is used quite a bit in athletics, and I've been an athlete my whole life. So Karen's approach, her approach to athletics, it just is what I want to be as an athlete, but I'm too lazy. So I could use a different word, but ultimately talking to Karen it propels me out of bed and off my butt and onto the track. But that doesn't really answer your question. I mean, everybody can be an inspiration. I think the word has kind of had a negative connotation lately. And we were really careful when selecting people for this book not to just highlight, the first person with Down syndrome to do this, or the first one to be this. We also want to focus on people who are just living a great life in their community with their best friends, and they're doing work that they love. They're not bored. They're active in any way that they want. So I was really conscious of not just using superlatives when I was choosing and interviewing people. I mean, I hope that makes sense. And I would love to hear from your listeners, especially if I could stand to learn something about that word and my use of it.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We touched on families raising young children a little bit earlier, so now kind of jumping back to that theme for families raising children with Down syndrome. What advice or encouragement would you offer based on the stories that you've heard, your own personal reflections, these 20 stories in Down syndrome out loud?
I love that. So I belong to some Facebook groups because I'm old and old people are on Facebook, right? I belong to some Facebook groups for families with people who have Down syndrome members. And if I see one more post that says, "Oh no, my baby has Down syndrome, whatever shall I do?" I want people to read this book deeply. I don't care if you get it at the library or, digitally, or you pay full price, or you find one in a little free library. This is not about me making money. This is about reading this book and reading about the people profiled and studying them deeply and doing research on every single person profiled in this book and finding their social media, watching their movies and documentaries and TV shows, looking at their art, watching them in action on YouTube as triathletes and rappers and dog treat bakers and t-shirt designers, like this t-shirt by Grace Key of Candidly Kind. If you do this, you're basically giving yourself a college course level on how your child with Down syndrome is capable of anything. And specifically, I want to add that a lot of the people that I spoke with for this book talked about the importance of their parents getting them very early physical therapy and speech therapy, which resonated. My mom had my little brother at 3 months old in physical therapy. And so he's still an athlete at age 50. In part because of that. So I think this is a great idea. I've heard it over and over from people in the book. Get a little extra help in physical therapy and speech therapy and tutoring. There is nothing wrong with getting a little help. And in fact, I should hire Karen Gaffney to teach me how to swim.
Awesome. So moving on to a broader conversation on disability, the disability community has been advocating for better representation and inclusion in various spaces, from media to education. I know I've definitely been doing that the past 16, 17 years right here on Special Chronicles on this podcast as just one example. But how do you think stories like the ones in Down Syndrome Out Loud on if our listeners go to specialchronicles.com/down syndrome, you can listen to I've had a number of people with Down syndrome on this podcast, and so I've created a playlist of all these episodes. So if for those of you listening, you can go to specialchronicles.com/down syndrome. But how do you think these stories can contribute to this larger conversation about inclusion?
Your stories on Special Chronicles, like the stories in Down Syndrome Out Loud, they perfectly illustrate what happens when groups, whether they're informal groups of friends or formal groups at school or in the workplace or Special Olympics, include people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So in your podcast and all of those episodes, you're giving us role models for what people can become. And in my book, the people profiled are also providing role models. So for instance, you can read about how Michael Holton in the southern part of the US, the school that he used to attend as a kid hired him once he got his degree and teaching certificate. They hired him to become a teaching assistant in the same school. Or you could read about how A.C. Hagel became a cheerleader at George Mason, and how John Cronin, the entrepreneur with Down syndrome at John's Crazy Socks, employs mostly people with disabilities. And so, I feel like your stories and mine both show that when we tear down the barriers and include all people, everybody wins.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Those, I remember hearing, and I forgot where, but like especially like even when it comes to employment, that it's not, you're not just hiring those of us with disabilities for charities, but it's the right business decisions. And so I think that message really kind of ties in as well.
Yeah.
What we talked a little bit about barriers, but kind of moving into what do you think are the biggest barriers still facing individuals with Down syndrome today, and what can be done to address them? Because that there's a lot, like especially within the past few months, going on with DEI, with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and even cuts. But what do you think are some of the biggest barriers, and what can we do? What can our listeners do to address them?
That is a great question. I swear I'm going to have to tell a joke or I'm going to burst into fire here on your show. No, seriously. Today, we have just heard that the entire education department in our country is about to be dismantled. The cuts to our education department have just thrown up incredible, enormous potential barriers, reducing the number of staff members to help with discrimination complaints at schools. These are people who were helping students with intellectual and developmental disabilities to navigate discrimination in schools, to fight against being pushed into, classes where they're not even learning basic reading and writing. And so, in addition, many people with Down syndrome have very few options after they graduate from high school or their post-secondary program at age 22, depending on where you live and how much funding your state or county has. They can't find meaningful work for fair pay. And if they do find a job that they love with a salary that's respectful of them, then they're financially penalized if they choose to get married. But the biggest barrier is public ignorance and willful public ignorance. If I could impart something to your listeners, it's to reach out in genuine friendship to somebody who looks or sounds or acts slightly different from you, and include them. Include kids with Down syndrome and other disabilities and genetic conditions in your birthday parties, in your scouting troops, in your sororities and drama clubs, in your pub trivia nights, and buy them a beer. One more thing, because you just asked a brilliant question, Daniel. What can we do? I just found out before I got on the show with you that my all fired up political commentary about this issue, the cuts in education and how it will affect people with Down syndrome. I just found out it's going to be published in salon.com for World Down Syndrome Day. I don't get to have all the fun as a political and social op-ed or commentary writer. Anybody in the entire world can sit down and write social or political commentary about Down syndrome and the issues affecting people who have this condition, and they can send it to any newspaper in the country. You don't have to live in the city to send your commentary to like the New York Times or the Dallas Morning News. Heck, I've been in the Boston Globe. I think I've been in Boston once. Anybody can make their voice heard. And if anybody listening wants to email me and ask me more about this, I will tell you, I will help you, I will hold your hand as you write your social or political commentary, and we will get your voice out there and published.
Awesome. So we'll remind the listeners at the end how they can get in touch with you. But as we got a few final questions here on this episode. Again, we're talking with Melissa Hart, author of Down Syndrome Out Loud, and coming back now to this new book that comes out in early June. What is one story? And I'm sure it might be hard to pick just one story, but what's one story from the book that you feel would leave a lasting impact on readers?
Oh, you're right. You're asking me to choose out of 25. I think so. I've written about Charlotte Woodward, who works at National Down Syndrome Society a couple of times for different newspapers, and she's also in Down Syndrome Out Loud. I find her story particularly powerful because she had a wonderful experience in mainstream education. She was super popular and super happy until she got to high school. And then all of a sudden, she found out that the administrators had put her in special ed classes way far away from all of her friends that she had just had for 8 years, 10 years. And she and her parents had to raise quite a ruckus to get her placed back into mainstream education. So think about that, and then think about how she graduated. I think it's summa cum laude with a degree in sociology from George Mason several years ago. And she's also the inspiration for the Charlotte Woodward Organ Transplant Discrimination Prevention Act. She worked side by side with senators and congresspeople, and tirelessly, she's been fighting this fight for years, trying to make sure that nobody with an intellectual or developmental disability is denied a life-saving organ. So her story really resonated with me.
Awesome. Looking ahead, how do you see the conversation around disability evolving, and what future projects or initiatives do you hope to work on next?
Yeah, you actually touched on it a few minutes ago, talking about the different TikTok videos, promotional videos that are going viral, say in the service of the National Down Syndrome Society, or I can't remember where that one was from. I think Italy, as you said. I had written it down. I don't know where it went. Yeah. But what we're talking about is videos gone viral that feature people with Down syndrome front and center. There's nobody like me in these videos. It's all Madison Tevlin and other people, friends, and people from NDSS in these videos. They are starting to facilitate these conversations and drive that bus. You know, Madison's got a talk show where she focuses on people's differences. And this is what we need, is to see people with intellectual and developmental disabilities leading these conversations and telling us firsthand, as they do in Down syndrome out loud through quotes, about their challenges and desires and needs and goals. And I have to tell you that for the next year, a lot of the people in the book and I are going to visit all sorts of conferences all over the United States where I will be the moderator, but the people on the panel that I'm moderating are people from the book. It's my job to research their lives and ask them questions, and then to sit down and let them stand up and take the microphone and empower them to tell their own stories. We are also going to be doing a bunch of projects as well, podcasts as well, and magazine and newspaper interviews where I want them to tell their stories. This is not about me writing a book. I've written plenty of books. It's time for them to own and tell their stories, and for the entire world to listen. You asked about my new project. I just got permission to record the audio version of Down syndrome out loud. So in April, I'll be spending hours and hours in a recording studio recording the book so that people who love audiobooks, as I do, can listen to the book. So I'm really excited.
Awesome. And is the audiobook going to be coming out around the same time as the book?
Yeah. So you have two ways to read it. Yeah, I mean, you can listen to it, or you can read it, or you can do both.
Well, both. Yeah. Awesome. You had mentioned conferences. It reminded me that there's a conference. I had the founders on. I think when they started this conference called the Deal Mom Conference.
Right.
And I believe Madison has spoken at it before, and they've had not only moms and parents, but I think that they've had individuals with Down syndrome who have spoken and have told their stories. I don't know if you've heard of the Deal Mom Conference, but I believe that's in Laguna Beach.
Oh, how lovely!
And I don't have the dates in front of me right now, but I'm sure if you're listening, you can Google the Dear Mom conference and find out, look on Instagram and find, because I'm not sure exactly when that conference is coming up, but awesome. Well, the time, the all has flown by. So before we get to the final question, do you have any final thoughts on? Now this is your second time on this program, but do you have any final thoughts to today on the Special Chronicles podcast?
Just want to say thank you, Daniel. I want to say that more and more writers with Down syndrome, both short form for newspapers and magazine, and book authors are getting published traditionally, and also opting to self-publish. And my field of expertise is really journalism, and especially, as I talked before, the personal essay and social and political commentary. And so if any of your listeners with Down syndrome want a little bit of guidance on how to write their story and submit it to the media, I would be so happy to help. I really want your stories out there in the world. We need them desperately.
Awesome. So, speaking of that, how can our listeners get in touch with you and even pre-order the book Down syndrome out loud?
Oh, thank you. You can go to my website to get in touch with me, and that's melissahart.com. 1 L 2 S's HART. And you can pre-order the book from anywhere you'd like. Your favorite independent bookstore. You could ask your library to order copies of this book. Any bookstore, online or in person, will be able to pre-order this book for you. If you go to the publisher's site at sourcebooks.com and type in Down syndrome out loud, they'll make it easy for you to pre-order as well. Thank you for asking.
Awesome. So we've got one final question, but let's go ahead and play the bumper to introduce this final question.
We're not just athletes.
We are the ambassadors of an uprising.
Peaceful protesters.
In a rebellion against anyone
who has a fear of difference.
Difference.
Our demands are
equality.
Dignity, and the recognition of our
shared humanity.
We will not stop or accept anything less.
Today, our world is
more divided than ever.
And coming together has never been more urgent.
The revolution
is inclusion.
Find out more at jointherevolution.org.
So, ever since I attended the 2019 Special Olympics World Games in Abu Dhabi, back in 2019, been asking this final question, and we don't just like what I'm sure the goal with this book Down syndrome out loud is same with this podcast. We don't just want our listeners to consume this content, even though it can be fun to listen, but with this podcast, we really want our listeners to take action into their communities, to bring inclusion into the communities, to hear the stories that we featured on this podcast, to in your new book, to read and to meet these incredible people that are featured. So what does inclusion mean to you?
Oh yeah, that last clip you played literally gave me goosebumps. That was just powerful. Okay, to me, inclusion means that we look for ways to make sure that everybody is treated with equal respect and kindness and compassion, and that everybody gets to play a valuable part in an event or a conversation or a piece of media or a group. No haters. And nobody gets pushed off to the side. that's what it means to me.
Awesome. Well, that's a perfect way to wrap up this episode. And for those of you I'm listening, a few final reminders at the end of this episode. You can shop our merchandise store, which is managed by Outshine Labels. We have t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs. I'm not wearing it right now in the studio, but it's our Disabled Voices Matter collection. 60% of the profits will go back to Special Chronicles. specialchronicles.com/shop is where you can go. We've had people in the UK and across the country wearing all the Disabled Voices Matter merch. So that's one way that you all can go out and support Special Chronicles. You can also go to specialchronicles.com/give and donate. Join at specialchronicles.com/plus. Tap that follow button. New episodes will be coming in this coming month. The Special Olympics World Winter Games in Italy took place at the beginning of this month, and so excited that we will be bringing you a recap series where I will be talking with staff. I'll be talking with a few athletes that competed at the World Winter Games, talking with a coach, talking with a Southern Tribal Global Messenger. So I'm so excited to bring you all this series on this podcast in coming up in April. So stay tuned to this podcast. Tap that follow button wherever you're listening to us, on Apple, Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss a new episode. Our guest has been Melissa Hart, author of Down From Them Out Loud, and I hope all of you listening in right now will go and pick up another copy to share with your neighbor and friends. And for those of you watching the video, you saw the book on the screen, but please, I hope all of you listening in will go and get this book, because it's these stories need to be shared. And thank you, Melissa, for writing this book, and thank you again for taking the time to come on the Special Chronicles podcast.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for all your good work in the world.
Thank you. And until then, we'll see you all next week, same time, same place, right here on specialchronicles.com. Got you all next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Special Chronicles podcast. Our podcast was produced by Daniel Smrokowski on the Special Chronicles Network. Follow Special Chronicles on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Subscribe, rate, and review Special Chronicles on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Our website, specialchronicles.com, where you can stream our archives of over 500 episodes for free. Also, there's a list of our favorites, original series, award-winning columns, and blogs. And sign up for our newsletter to receive exclusive bonus content delivered to your inbox. Again, specialchronicles.com. Special Chronicles is hosted by Podbean Podcast Hosting. Our live streams are powered by StreamYard. Thanks, as always, to our business manager, Adam Smrokowski, who always encourages us to never give up. I'm Daniel Smrokowski, back next week with more stories.
Special Chronicles, giving respect and a voice to people with special needs.